The Black Lives Matter movement has been a moment in Scottish history that has turned our attentions to a difficult component of our national makeup. Scotland played its role in over 300 years of human suffering that has its blood in the built environment we know today as modern Scotland. UMS decided to talk about the importance to Scotland of the Black Lives Matter issues. We invited a small group in line with Phase 3 guidance for a physically distanced conversation at a site of significance to the debate. We came down to Plantation Quay on Glasgow's Clydeside, where thousands of African slaves were sent over to the Americas to be worked to death on Scottish-owned sugar, cotton and tobacco plantations. It must be noted that the modern name Pacific Quay has no historical significance, as it was created simply as a marketing enterprise following the land being reclaimed for commercial use after the Garden Festival closure. It does not reflect the site as a departure point for ships bound for the Pacific Rim. Our talk includes Roza Salih. Roza arrived in Scotland in 2001 as a child of a Kurdish family seeking asylum fleeing from northern Iraq. She grew up in Glasgow, and at the age of 15, while still a pupil at Drumchapel High School, Roza Salih campaigned with school friends to stop the UK border agency carrying out dawn raids, taking school children to detention and then deporting them. Euan Girvan. Euan is a retired English teacher who taught at Drumchapel High School and was deeply involved in the Glasgow Girls campaign, as well as fighting for social justice and equality on various platforms. Campbell. Graham is a veteran political campaigner and community activist who in May 2017 was elected as Glasgow's first African Caribbean councillor. Graham was instrumental in the Glasgow City Council holding its first ever official Black History Month event hosted by the Lord Provost in 2017. Graham also took part in the 2018 two-part documentary Slavery, Scotland's Hidden Shame. Martin Chomsky. Martin has campaigned against racism and inequality since the Thatcher years, and as a writer and musician, Martin has explored many aspects of what divides communities. Old School is an urban arts collective that Martin, Graham and I contribute to in our attempt to communicate truth to the youth. But before we begin, here's a little sample of some of the material coming up soon from Old School.
We are living in a world in which everybody is interdependent. It is not white, this world. It is not black either. All men are brothers. It is not a romantic matter. It is the unutterable truth. History is not something you read about in a book. History is not even the past. It's the present. The present.
Remember this, remember this, remember, know your history.
Well, we're standing on what was Plantation Quay, and the fact that it's named after plantations is the clue in the word right there, because it's telling you that Scotland was involved in plantation slavery around tobacco and sugar. But obviously, plantations is a nice word for it. What it actually means is a death camp for enslaved Africans who were kept there for up to 300 years. Talk about the farthest reach of slavery. So Scottish people perpetrated that. So this is almost a celebration of the perpetration of massive human rights violations for hundreds of years. So to me, it's an insult that somewhere is named after a plantation. It's like saying, Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. It's equivalent of that.
Yeah.
It's not. No, you wouldn't have that. So why have we got this?
And what was interesting, the BBC changed its name, to paper over that, so it's now Atlantic Quay or something, or the Quay, but they knew that it had a history, but they just said, right, okay, we'll wipe that history and build here. And that's what I find interesting about here, is that they were quite happy to not go into detail about actually what it meant.
All right. I suppose the nutshell of it is that we've always fought against two mythical narratives in this country about its origins and its history. One of them is the unionist one, which says, oh, isn't Britain great because it was an empire that granted freedom to slaves and abolished slavery everywhere? Forget the 300 odd years before that when we actually perpetrated it. But never mind, that's that history. The other one is, oh, Scotland's this poor wee country which had nothing to do with slavery and empire. Yeah, it was the English what done it. It wasn't us. Both of those are massive lies, perpetration of lies and cover up the truth of history about what Glasgow was involved in. So we have to start with a genuine history of the country. That starts with looking just how deeply involved Scotland and indeed this city was. So the first thing is, well, merchants. Merchants, if they were merchants, they were merchants of products that were entirely consumed and produced by slavery, by enslaved Africans. So if you were a tobacco merchant, who do you think the labour force was? It was enslaved Africans. Sugar, same thing. Cotton, same thing. Scots were massively involved in the Caribbean and in the Chesapeake Bay, where in Virginia, where the best tobacco comes from. People still call it Virginia. You feel smoke in the rollies, it's telling you where it's coming from. That's why we got the streets. So Scots are massively involved in that from Glasgow through the trading, through the triangular trade. The other thing that we've always deliberately forgotten is our involvement in the slavery in Liverpool, Bristol and London. 5 top firms in Liverpool were Scots owned. One of them was William Gladstone's dad's firm. Liverpool in 1 year alone put 1,000 slave journeys across the Atlantic, just 1 year, I believe. And that's Scots firms what did that. So we were right there in the middle of it. And then finally, to top it off, when they abolished it and they compensated the slave owners, not the slaves, guess what? Scots were 15% of the people who got compensation, when Scots are only 10% of the population. So we were twice as likely to get slavery compensation for Scots who had slaves and who got compensation, bailed out by the public, and you, the public, only stopped paying back that debt.
5 years ago.
2015.
Yeah, I was
so the
amazed.
idea this is past money. It's not. It's current money. Your taxes have been paying it. If you've been working before 2015, your taxes have paid back these slave owners.
Yeah, unbelievable that was kept so hidden from us for so long. You know, it's unbelievable. It came as a complete shock to me when I found this out. You know, and that's the thing about the society we're talking about. It keeps burying all of that so that we don't actually deal with it and discuss it.
This is where what I was saying earlier, where the White Lives Matter gains some traction. It's that element of denial. I don't want to know. Don't tell me. Don't tell me. Don't tell me. You know. So this is what we're kind of up against. This is what we're talking about. I was talking about before. I'm kind of concerned that there's going to be a lot of people just don't tell me. Don't tell me. It's not what I was taught. It's not what my daddy taught me. It's not what my granddaddy taught me. Do you know?
I think there's been a lot of support, though. I think in Scotland for Black Lives Matter. I think a lot of people are not talking about it, which is a positive thing. It's like a movement, has shaken Scotland and the world. And I think by its own, like talking about the issues that we are, slavery did happen. This, these are the history of, human race. This is what we've done. It's actually just by itself, it's a positive thing. I think in its, I know we are talking about a lot of negativity, but I think by talking about it, we are educating people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And being here and discussing this, and Graham, you've been excellent in talking about colonialism and kind of the history of slavery and Black Lives Matter. So, your documentaries has been excellent. So it's a great work that we're all trying to do together for change to happen.
It's coming before that.
It's actually quite cathartic, but we've just got to get to the people who don't want to know. That's the point.
Yeah. It's a systematic racism. That's what the problem is.
Yeah.
That people are not moving in. The structure is racist. People are not getting employed, recruited, And I think that was a Graham and I actually, that was our kind of main kind of discussion in the past.
Well, yes. 5 years ago, when we had the Ferguson tour, we actually had the Black Lives Matter people come to Strathclyde Junior when you were up there.
Yeah.
And one of the really massively interesting things about that experience was, okay, well, what's our institutionalised racism? And here we had this kind of denialism about that Scottish institutions could even be racist. And people have that white fragile defence, which is like, oh well, if you're accusing my institution of being racist, then you're accusing me personally of being racist. So that's nonsense.
Exactly.
It's just, the fact is, I'm in this institution now. I campaigned around lack of employment for black people in 2007. So I've been working on that a long time. Now I'm inside the structure. If I'm in it, but I don't do anything to change it, then I'm just as guilty as anybody else there of perpetuating the racist system if I don't try to change it. So my things is, okay, what are the special measures I can do to make sure that actually recruits some black people? I've done some of those things, but nowhere near enough. And that's the pressure that they need from the rest of society to make institutions change. I can say this very bluntly, that my institution is institutionally racist. But I tell you, you will not get many politicians overtly saying that in this country. There's a denialism that it's possible for us to discriminate. But those demos on June the 7th showed us that young people who've grown up their entire lives in Scotland, so they've only known Scottish institutions, the racism they have experienced has been Scottish racism by our institutions. So we can't move that and pretend it's just the past. It's actually the present time. We've recreated the conditions for racial discrimination. So we have to get real about it.
And it's in schools, obviously, as well. I mean, again, if I look at the range of teachers within the Scottish education system, I mean, I think that speaks for itself in terms of the paucity of different cultures that are actually involved in teaching people from different cultures. It first hit me when I welcomed people from abroad and of colour from abroad, and I realised here are teachers a different colour to me, and they're teachers. And I didn't think in the way that you thought. I was thinking in the way of, my goodness, right? But I hadn't seen that before. I hadn't experienced that before. I mean, it wasn't that I was a sort of overtly racist or anything else, but I was just like in my head, I was thinking, oh my goodness, right, okay, here we are discussing this is what's happening in their country, blah, blah, blah. I just hadn't got it into my head. And so the first instance is to do with the actual visual representation. Secondly, though, is what we're talking about is just what's happened in the institutions. Where is the representation, right? And in terms of children themselves, how are they getting access? Are children from black and minority ethnic, what access are they actually getting to education? Now, in some cases in Glasgow it's been good, but in other places it's been really, really bad. And in terms of when you go further up, as we were talking about earlier, what happens in terms of university education? Where, when do the barriers start being created in education? That doesn't just go for children from black and minority ethnic backgrounds, it goes from children from poverty backgrounds, of whom some children are from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. But it's all of that we're looking at the moment is stopping people from getting into positions, as we were talking about earlier, into the BBC, where they can represent a wider range of point of view.
We all have a degree of unconscious bias, so the question is then, does that have an impact in who's employed and how they're employed? Does it have an impact on what knowledge you have to access those jobs? Well, for example, in teaching, I'm on the education committee, so I'm in the position to know because I ask teachers, and right now we're recruiting hundreds of teachers to fill vacant positions in schools. But to be in that position, you have to be in the existing pool of teachers. Not many BME people who are in the pool of teachers, and they haven't advertised to join the pool of teachers. So if you are a newly qualified BME teacher, how do you join that pool so you then get invited to become the chemistry teacher in X secondary school? You can't be, because those are two exclusions. Now, they're not conscious, because actually they keep a pool deliberately so they have enough staff to fill those vacancies and those subjects they have to cover in the curriculum, right? But it's an accidental, unintended block, but it's a practical block, which has the impact of racial discrimination. Now, those people doing it would absolutely furiously deny
that
they're institutionally racist, but the impact of what they've done is because it stops BME teachers getting into the classrooms.
And it shows that it's ingrained institutionally and individually. Do you know, like you're saying, you regard yourself as being anti-racist or not racist, but there are certain elements that in your actions you are, because you constantly you look at something and you see a different colour. So, oh God, where are they from? Do you know what I mean? This is how it is for so many people, and I think that's really important, especially with refugees and asylum seekers, is to humanise their story. Why are they here? For the most part, they're here to give us the luxury that we live in comparison. To give us a cheap petrol. God knows so many of these wars are about oil, right?
Well, the arm sales, that's a big one.
Absolutely.
We created wars
Absolutely.
in their countries.
War is the biggest money spinner on the planet.
Yes.
You know?
I think you're right. We have to ask these questions. You know, we're making multi-billionaire in this country with arms sales, and then we are saying, well, asylum seekers, you know, go back home, or you're illegal immigrant. You create wars in their home country where they're supposed to go, and I mean, these are all questions. Society is really unfair, and people like conscience are not educated. People are, you know, deliberately creating blocks for employment, lack of representation. It's really sad.
Well, the thing is that the unconscious bias needs to be exposed and laid bare when it's happening. Because most of the discrimination that people experience is subtle. It's not overt. Nobody's going to directly say to your face, "Oh, we don't want you." It's going to be a process or a procedure or some kind of mechanism or some kind of insider knowledge that you don't have, that the people who are in that profession have. And the duty of any public body, at least, is to try to remove those barriers that are in the way. Because you have to. It's even things like mundane as to who does the interviewing. It's strange. I've been on interview panels for teachers, and I've seen the difference it makes. Just the fact that I'm there, and I have the perspective that I've got, that it's in the room, present. Strangely, they managed to interview and shortlist BME teachers to interview. Strangely, when about on the panel.
Yes.
Oh no, why not?
Yes.
Even a simple thing like that changes the dynamic in the room.
course.
When decisions are being
Representation
made.
is important, and we're talking about 5% of Scotland population is from B, M, E, and ethnic minorities. Why we're not being represented in structures of society, in sectors of societies, and I mean, that's a great example, Graham. You're saying that for you just being there, that BME people are being interviewed, and I think that is the way forward, that we have to represent our communities. That, you know, even in the Scottish Parliament, we don't even have any BME women represented. I mean, that's half of the population of that 5% is not even being represented. And I think for also women BMEs, there's double discrimination as well. And I think women also economically and also have to do a lot of chores that other men are not doing. And I think with that, it's kind of disempowers. It does not allow the woman to actually take that work. So and I think for moving forward, from me thinking, I think it's that representation of people from that community and being present to make that change happen, and also speaking for them, having a platform for them, and I think that's how we're gonna move forward. I think as we said, there's a block for teachers to be recruited. That's the way it is for politicians. It's the same thing, and we see it in all the different parties, that there is a block for ethnic minorities to be a candidate, and you know, for the interviewer to kind of interview you to be the candidates at the first stage, and then after that, which seat are actually they're going to give it to you? Is that electable? You know, that is very important. They also, you know, there are people playing the power behind the, you know, the the parties, and I think it goes back to kind of unconsciousness of being
I'm not even sure it's not unconscious. There's so much I cannot say, but what I can say, to back you up there, because there's certainly a denial that the procedures within political parties can be discriminatory.
Yes.
That is the core thing, and that making your colleagues and your comrades understand that actually this procedure is not quite right, you've got to do something different. And they say, oh well, if the natural mechanism of things is the right way, leave it to the members in the local area and all of that stuff. And then you say, well, look at the results of that. 20 years we've had not one single BAME woman in that parliament, right? And the two people we've got are from one particular BME community, not at all reflecting the massive diversity of the communities that we've got.
From Asian community, Pakistani backgrounds, which is not reflective of the diversity of Glasgow. There's over about 200 cultures, and I don't know if we represent all of them, but around the world, there's a lot of people are living in Scotland, and Glasgow being the most diversity in Scotland. We don't have, we have two elected representative for all these diversity that we have in the city of Glasgow, and I think it's a shame, and really the people of Glasgow don't seem to be represented at all when it comes to a politician making changes for them, their voices, their in education, in employment. All of these barriers are affecting their lives, poverty, and I think through representation there can be change.
The need for gender balance has been accepted with things like all women shortlists, right? Yep. So that is what happens when seats become available. So we will certainly have more women MSPs in 2021. The question is whether we have a gender balance or not. But certainly we'll have more. The question is how many more, and then whether any of them are from a BME background. So we're hopeful that will include some BME women. Then the question is what happens with the rest of it, because say like disabled people right now, having all disabled shortlists is actually legal. We could do that, but so far I think there's just one disabled member of parliament, that's Jeremy Balfour, the Tory. So if it was reflective of the population, there should be at least 10 times that number, so at least there should be some more. So we're trying in the SNP to try and work out a way to do that, where we have more disabled people, more BME people elected in winnable positions. It's a struggle because obviously we have to persuade the party to make the changes we've done, but last year we had to go to a conference with a special motion because after all these years, 20 years, nothing had changed. So we had to sort of say look, we'll do something different. This is what we have to do. Give us the authority to do it. That is nearly done. I'll be able to say something about that.
It's to do with the visual racism that I think we perceive first of all. I mean, I remember Mohammed Omar at Scott. I remember when he first came into the class, I thought, I've never seen a guy so black as Mohammed Omar. And I was doing this thing about surprise, and he went, I never realised how white somebody could be until I saw you, right? And so we came to the understanding at that point. We got over that first hurdle of difference, but that's what a lot of us need to do, and then move to all the other institutionalised aspects of how we're being inhibited from fully developing, whether it's race or class. And poverty especially now, and I mean we're all going to be dealing with that just round the corner as it hits us too. But in relation to what you were saying, sorry, I'll take you off, but back to what you're talking about at Glasgow Green. And
I think it was a massively important event because obviously, as you say, it was the largest gathering of black people for a political cause we've ever had in this country, and we think about 10,000 people were on the Glasgow demo, about 8,000 on the Edinburgh demo, something like 4,500 at Aberdeen. So altogether across the country, we think somewhere between 30 and 40,000 people were on the streets that day. That's despite COVID lockdown and everything. So if there hadn't been for COVID, people like me would have been on it. They would have been 3 times bigger. So what makes them historic, and I think we haven't quite grasped how historic it is, but it's black people leading an anti-racism campaign on the streets from the front. The character of those demos were very spontaneous, very mass, but also quite uneven. There's some people with progressive ideas, some people with not very progressive ideas, but all of them complaining about racism they experienced in Scotland. And that was what's different. They raised George Floyd, they raised Sheku Bayo, whose name is now known out there in a way that it hasn't been for the 5
absolutely.
years before the campaign.
Yeah, exactly.
It kind of was frustrating in one way that people were on the streets about a death of thousands and thousands of miles away and not about the one that happened right here.
Yeah.
But at least it clicked to them that there was a connection.
Yeah, the connections were made.
And that's what made it brilliant. So never again will we be able to say that there isn't such a thing as Black Scotland. It exists, and it's politically a moment that's arrived, and they're there. And now that influence on the wider politics is starting to happen. So it's reflecting itself in the growth of the Black Lives Matter network. So there's now groups of, we've got a network now of about half a dozen or so groups now. In fact, main cities plus a couple of smaller towns, Renfrewshire, Lanarkshire. So we formed a network a couple of weekends ago. So we're starting to coordinate what we're doing. We'll be asking, obviously, to try and create a more broader anti-racism movement. But it's certainly a younger generation thing. It's their product, and it's reflective of the fact that they're struggling to change the institutions. So they demand, obviously, the question around the statues and the naming and the history stuff has been part of that. Sometimes that's got in the way of the debate because actually people have spent a lot of time talking about statues and bronzes and stone rather than the dead bodies. That's kind of annoys me. But at least we've been able to engage in a discussion about what these symbols mean, these racist symbols from the past, what they mean in a context now. So the citizens have got to come together, work out how they want their cities to look, what they should be named, what should be called. But frankly, you could remove all of the statues, all of the names. It would make no difference if the institutionalised racist structure is still there.
And also in terms of my kids pick up black culture musically, sports-wise and all this kind of stuff, but I'm constantly saying to them it's not just about that. See, in America in particular, black people have been revered as sports, we know this as entertainers, but when it comes to actually getting positions of power, they're nowhere near it. And you get people like Martin Luther King, he gets assassinated. Malcolm X gets assassinated. Do you know what I mean? The people who actually have the courage and the articulacy to actually come out and say these things, like you're talking about dead bodies, piles of dead bodies over centuries, right? They're not listening. They don't want to be heard. So this is where we've got to get past just black people as entertainers, as entertainers for the white elite. Basically, is what they're historically been. Do you know? And this is what the youngsters need to understand, that black people are as talented as anything as anybody else. Do you know?
And I think that's where, again, we're talking about education coming in, and education really does have a big point to play on this. And I mean, I think the way that I always felt that worked really well is when you've got older people who are experienced, older pupils that are experienced, going in and talking to younger pupils about what their experience of racism and everything else. It seems to get through then much more, but it's something that's still not really explored in schools. I mean, we've gone to schools where people said, we don't really know what to do about this racism issue. You're thinking, what? I mean, we'll start to tackle it, for goodness sake. I mean, they wait for us to come in and sort of suddenly go, and it just, so people, educators are scared. But as we said before, I mean, I've got a great concern about the fact that educators are becoming very middle class group of people. Yeah. Just as the journalists we were talking about are as well, and so there's fewer that maybe are wanting to explore or maybe just don't have it within them to understand what these issues are. So we've got a massive amount of education to do in schools, and as we were talking about earlier, out of schools, where you can try to street educate the people who are, especially in this part of the world, have got really mixed up and confusing aspects of what their history's about. I mean,
it's like I reiterated to Graham, because he wasn't here when I said it. James Baldwin suggested White History Week, but like 51 weeks a year, right? Yeah, this is what it needs to be. You need to have street teams out there, just leave the statues up, so you can say to people, do you know what he did? Do you know how many slaves that guy owned? Do you know how much reparations he was paid when after the abolition of slavery? So let them serve the purpose.
Yeah, but absolutely. I mean, we've got a particular issue to deal with in Glasgow, within Glasgow, because the group that perceived that somehow the Black Lives Matter march was somehow going to march on the cenotaph, right? And we had a group of loyalist and far right-leaning people protecting a cenotaph for people that were meant to have fought in a war against fascism. Right, when we've got that sort of complete, we really have major issues to deal with in terms of sectarianism that has been woven into that as well, because at one point the Green Brigade also would give out rightly support of the Black Lives Matter campaign sort of thing, but we got to a very complicated point in our history that we really need to address, and unfortunately our public leaders are not really addressing that, apart from to say this shouldn't happen. But we really it needs to be explained, and it needs to be taken apart, picked apart, and say, right, okay.
With that is, Euan, is that then you have to examine capitalism. Because
of course,
was a product of capitalism, and no institution.
Nobody's wanting to explore capitalism.
Capitalism.
Well, you
Education
just
system, media. Nobody wants to. Wants to tackle it. But I know. I did the kids' version of
I do think
Trades of Philanthropist, and I had Nicola Sturgeon saying, "Oh, great, that's my favourite book ever. Give me a copy." So I did. But it's not part of the national curriculum now.
No.
It's not going to be. It's too dangerous.
No.
Well, this thing, it has to become part. And this is the thing. The thing about the capitalism and slavery thing. I mean, obviously, in historian speak, they talk about the Williams theory, which is that capitalism had its origins with the capital boost from slavery.
Yes.
That's now mainstream. The fact that our country's main historian, Tom Devine, has converted to that theory, most of the anti-slavery historians that are studying stuff, that's where they're coming from. So they're explicitly linking origins of capitalism in Scotland and the capitalist firm, the capitalist bank, here in Glasgow. So that's being said now by our historians. The question is whether the educational authorities have the courage to say
to take that up
in the bloody curriculum, which is what the Black Lives Matter movement is demanding. When we say decolonise the curriculum, that's what it means. It means to acknowledge the origins of capitalism in slavery. And that's a big ask.
Yeah, but we're at that cusp.
But as I say, it's a minimum requirement. A big ask it is.
You can't tell the truth about
it. No, absolutely. Everybody's going to be confused and divided unless you get to that issue.
Is this like? I'm thinking of like academically, there are so many different fields that need to get their act together in order to coordinate the foundation of the beginning of this kind of change. Because as you're talking about there's so much confusion, and it involves individual people on education committees developing curriculum and then sending teachers out. I mean, I think I was trying to ask earlier on, how complicated is the process, or are we overcomplicating it? Is that an excuse?
It is quite a complicated process in the sense that the councils which employ the teachers don't control the curriculum. We have a national curriculum body which does. Now the councils can give some guidance, some ideas, they can create educational resource materials, but they can't instruct teachers to teach it this way or that way. That's the Education Scotland, that's the Education Secretary. So we have to persuade those bodies to change the national curriculum so that this information we talk about is examinable when you're studying that subject. But also it's not just a history subject. I know there's a network of about 1,200 Scottish history teachers. They have a Facebook group and all that. So there's a whole struggle amongst them. How are they going to educate themselves as history teachers? What resources are they going to create and gather to make it possible for them to teach it within the curriculum? What do we make compulsory? These are big political questions, and we've got people on one side of the unionist historians who don't want the empire to be done down, and you've got the romantic nationalist historians who basically want to not say anything bad about Scotland. So you've got two resistances in the parliament right there, which mitigates against them telling the truth. It's only because Black Lives Matter pushed this right to the front now that they feel some pressure to kick back on.
Plus, you've got an economic history which brings in Marxism, and you're examining where mercantilism becomes capitalism, and then you start treading on top of modern political toes. Let's not politicise the classroom, etc., etc.
I think that's been one of the greatest fears, is they really don't want any politics to be discussed in great detail in the classroom and at great length within the classroom. And it's only now that we're getting part of the curriculum is political literacies coming in to the curriculum. But I think all these issues now are on the cusp, and we might be able to get over that by what's happening in our society, whether it's modern studies teachers that take it up or English teachers or whatever. You just don't know how it's going to proceed, because what we've got is multiracial classrooms. We're dealing, teachers are dealing with that, so they have to address these issues. For so long, though, they've shied away from it. It's been the fear factor, and now it really is up to those people in school who are activist teachers to actually take the curriculum and push with it, which they've always done, but they need to push more, I think, and I hope they will. And I know a number of them are trying to, but it's a big ask.
Well, my biggies, I suppose, is I want reparative justice. That's been my main sort of legal campaign for the last 6 or 7 years or now, since the Commonwealth Games, since we formed Flying Up Scotland, Jamaica. Really, it was all about recognising Scotland's link to that country and to countries like Sierra Leone and Ghana and so on, where we gained our wealth from. So I would like to see Scotland do a formal acknowledgement of that and set an international standard of not just a formalistic apology, but actually a reparative process where they actually make good the wrong that's been done by helping to economically develop the societies that have been denuded by the history of slavery. So that's what I hope Scotland will be. I think there's a potential for that, because certainly the ears are open, the doors are slightly open now. I think we could make it happen. We could become the first country that actually takes its responsibility seriously on it. If we do, that sets a massive international precedent.
See, what old school is a combination of my literary background or musical background. So I'm putting big ideas to music, which people don't really try and do that now. I obviously, I do my poetry as well, which tackles issues that people are too afraid to tackle. So I'm just going to keep on keeping brave with what I'm saying. I hope so. Anyway.
I'd like Graham's and David Hayman's episodes to be to the centre of the curriculum, but also probably at least another 5 programmes on this issue. I think they were they were engaging. They were at the right level. They were at the right level for adults and for kids. And I think that is the first step that we could really make a big effect on people's thinking on what we've been discussing tonight. In terms of reparation, though, I think that is definitely, I've heard now more and more people talking about it, that it's an absolute necessity to actually face up to what our past was and how to deal with the future and how to deal with repaying that in terms of a much more embodied future, in I suppose in light of, as you talked about, the piles of dead people that have come and human souls that have been as a result of the slavery and the capitalist society that we've built here for ourselves.
Education for all and developing social security to be a much better system for all